think? Should we get started?
Yeah. Start without her.
The author is here. It's the audience we're trying to scrape in.
I know what I said.
So I'm Nancy White, Director of Writers Project. Welcome to the last Writers Project event of the semester. But don't worry, there's more next semester. We still have a little bit of flux and a couple other people who are coming. So I can't give you the full list, but we've got some really interesting characters, so stay tuned. Today we're going to hear from Naomi Huffman, who is both a writer and an editor. She's also past founder of a literary magazine, past transformer of a small press into a much more significant press, and listen to this part. She was born in a small town in an area that began as kind of an agricultural kind of community where nobody said to themselves, wow, a career in the arts, yeah, let's do that. Does that even sound kind of familiar, maybe? And from that, she grew to be a writer and be an editor and now be someone who can mentor other people coming into publishing with skill and humor and a wonderful, refreshing lack of all those things that could get in the way of that. She used the word stifling about the place she began, and that rang a chord with me, having gone to high school in southern Vermont, or southern Washington County, Vermont County, Washington County. You know, you're surrounded by some great people, but there aren't always the stimuli that you crave. But she read a lot, and that is, for many of us, the solution when we feel like life is getting stifling and you don't have the money to travel somewhere or the knowledge even of where you want to go yet. But books could do that, and eventually she found I do want to be a writer, and I would like to make books happen. Something could go from being not a book to being that thing you hold, you open it, and another world jumps out at you or pulls you in. One of the things that I really like about her past is the way she would just kind of slalom into, let's try this. And then it would become bigger and better. And then she would slide on to the, hop on to the, get promoted into the next thing and transform that. And I think you'll get a sense of like the spirit in a person, which many of you have also, that allows that kind of transformation to take place and helps people notice what you're good at. I just want to read this little quote that I found in an online interview. I credit my reading for my overall thirst for connection and for my thirst for knowledge, my thirst for being a part of a community. I was aware from a very young age of the outside world. It was the stifling aspect of my life that made me thirst for more, and then take on an awareness that this wasn't all there is, that there is more. If you would join me in welcoming her, that would be great. And she will take questions at the end, as she's going to first read from her own work, then talk a little bit about the development of her career, and then take questions so you can ask about her writing or the world of publishing itself. All right, Naomi Huffman.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Courtney and Doug and Kathy, everyone that sort of helped me get here and prepare to talk to you guys. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this good? Okay. I was going to read something else. Sorry, I had something else prepared anyway. But instead, I'm going to be a millennial jerk and read off my phone because this just seems to be a little bit more appropriate. It's an essay called Wherever, It was published in a anthology on Midwestern writers that was published by a small press called Rust Belt, and they publish writers who are from the middle of the country, which I think is really very cool. All right. When I was young, my father said he was going to tell me how to get anywhere I wanted and never get lost. He opened his Atlas of Indiana on the kitchen table, the site of prayer and ritual and nourishment for my family, and now finding yourself. The world on the map did not look familiar. The land was orange and threaded with white rivers and blue roads. When my father pointed to our road and said, "This is where we live," his index finger covered up our whole county. I was only beginning to understand the scale of the world. He explained that each road was numbered. We lived on County Road 500 West, which was 5 miles west of the center of the county. He pointed out the counties that surrounded ours, all more or less rectangular, unmarked, and therefore indistinguishable. The roads inside each county were plotted on the same grid. The secret to never getting lost, then, was in placing myself within these lines and boxes. I noticed, too, that there were 4 sides to everywhere. It seemed there was no way out. But there was. I found it anyway. It would take growing up and leaving home to know what my father was actually showing me on that map, that his entire life was contained within those lines, and he didn't expect me to go very far. And why would he? My father had lived his entire life in the same place. I think he was simply unable to see any further. When I moved to Chicago after high school, I was glad to be navigating within a familiar system, a tessellating grid ruled by the cardinal directions, with street numbers that got larger as you traveled further from the center, especially since most of what I had known to be true actually wasn't. Sometimes the center isn't the middle. Knowing where you are doesn't mean that you are not also lost. When I came to Chicago, I became a person. By this, I mean I began, a bit belatedly, the unremarkable task of asking what it means to be a person in the world. To not just ask what it means to be a woman, daughter, sister, friend. I mean the things you can only know about yourself when you ask them in a hard, certain light. How to pray to know God. How to say I love you to a man with the power to hurt you. How to get yourself out of bed when you can't get yourself out of bed. What to say to a friend who is losing pieces of her body to cancer. How to leave a friend who needs you. How to write a poem. What to tell your mother when she asks you if you're okay. There are new questions every day. I feel lucky to ask them. When he was in a good mood, and the conditions were so, my father could be playful. He liked to sing silly songs, make up nonsense words that my 2 sisters and I would parrot back to him. I liked him best this way, of course. He was otherwise given to violent tantrums that sometimes ended in one of us getting hit. My mother watched, and I know now that it was all she could do. She was afraid to. In one of my father's favorite games, he pretended to be lost while we were out in the car heading home. The game began when he asked, "Which way do we go?" Even though at first I could not read the street signs, I was very good at this game. I knew the landmarks. I often volunteered to sit between my sisters in the back seat, so I was afforded the entire view through the windshield. Turn right on Nebo Road after the bend with the red barn. Past the house with the barn that we could only see in winter when the trees were bare. "And now what?" he would ask. Left at the highway. Right at the White House on the corner. Past the tower and its red eyeball. Past the white church with the small park and the tall slide. A little further on then, the 2 oak trees and the crabgrass. One small, one tall, like siblings. The swing hanging still on the slab porch. The blue 78 Impala, the color of a clear sky, but parked for all of time at the end of our gravel drive. The house, low-slung and unembellished, its shutterless windows staring out like the flat eyes of something dead. My father had built this house. He had laid the bricks himself. I'm not quite sure how to go home anymore, so I don't. I spent Christmas alone last year. I had high hopes for the day. I was writing something and thought that the solitude would help, but it didn't turn out to be all that great or helpful. I placed a large order at a nearby Chinese restaurant, and when it was delivered, the food was cold. The vegetable egg foo young was clotted in its white carton like it was already leftovers. I ate a few bites, scraped at the other boxes and containers, but all of it was wormy, gluey goop. I threw it all away. I thought a lot about my ex-boyfriend, whose absence made my collarbone ache still, months after our breakup. I tried to write, but it was all never mind, and this is shit. I sent text messages to friends to let them know I was having a good time alone. I had agreed to feed a friend's cats while she was visiting her family. I planned to walk to her apartment building earlier in the day. From my apartment in Chicago's Humboldt Park, the walk is about 50 minutes, about 28 blocks, 12 west, 16 north, but I walk fast. It's a walk I enjoy. There are shortcuts to be taken through parks and empty lots and alleys. But I kept putting it off, and suddenly it was 5 o'clock, so I headed out in the early winter dark. About 10 minutes into my walk, as I entered the southwestern edge of Humboldt Park, it began to drizzle. Fortunately, I had thought to grab my umbrella, of the spindly drugstore sort, but refused to lift it until I couldn't ignore that the drizzle had turned into a blowy and needly rain. In the center of the park, I stood beneath an oak or elm or maple, whatever, something big and generously branched, to shake out my umbrella and check my progress on the app on my iPhone. My teeth were chattering. I wasn't even halfway. Later, when I got back to my apartment, 90 minutes had passed and everything I was wearing was wet, my stomach hurt, and I was crying. I turned out all the lights in my apartment, I yanked off my soggy boots, and got in bed with my damp clothes on. I just wanted to sleep. I just wanted the day to be over. There are miles between loneliness and solitude. Still, I wasn't lost. I'd taken myself somewhere and back, and I was glad to be home. Show me a map, I'll tell you where I am. Thank you. This is a little bit of a depressing Christmas essay. But thank you guys again for being here. It's really cool that you have this program and this resource at your school. So keep that in mind. It's like really, really awesome to have people visiting, I think, from other parts of the country and people to sort of look at as examples to, I don't know, try to model your career after and your dreams. So, as Nancy said, I grew up in a really small town. I did not grow up thinking that I would work in publishing or become an editor or even really pursue writing, even though it was something that I'd always loved. But that is what I was able to do, and thanks to no small part for the teachers and a lot of mentors that I had, librarians, people in my life that really supported me from a very, very early age. And I moved to Chicago when I was 18 to go to art school, which was just an entire concept that my family, my father in particular, thought was like really strange. And there weren't a lot of people in our lives who had done anything like that. But I had a really great time in college, and I learned a lot, and I learned to, most importantly, think about myself and the things that I wanted to do with my life in a very serious way. And I was very, very fortunate to also find a community of teachers at Columbia that wanted to help me achieve the things that they saw that I wanted to do. I started working in publishing sort of because it seemed to be one of the only ways to make money as a writer. And I interned at a magazine in Chicago called New City. I was initially an art writer and reviewer, and started writing literary reviews in my last couple of months of that internship. That was when I was a junior in college. And by the time I graduated, I had gone through the very disappointing process of applying for a lot of jobs that no one wanted to hire me for. I spent the last semester at Columbia just sort of sending out job applications to any position that seemed like it would kind of fit, and not hearing a lot back. It was just sort of like talking to a brick wall. But I was fortunate enough to be asked to join the staff at the magazine that I worked at as a literary editor, and that led me to the small press world in Chicago, and to Curbside Splendor and to Featherproof Books, the two small presses I worked at in Chicago. And I was fortunate too, in terms of timing, to begin working at those presses when they were going through either huge developmental overhauls internally, or were just starting out, which was the case with Curbside. Curbside was founded by a guy who had a background in finance and hospitality, and coming in as someone who had worked as a literary editor and had been communicating with publicists and other editors at other small presses for a couple of years already, actually turned out to really help me out in the process of learning to create books and distribute literature. I had no idea what I was getting into when I took on the position at Curbside. I was initially the managing editor, and later on became editor-in-chief. But before I was promoted to editor-in-chief, I think the thing that really helped me the most was identifying the unique problems that Curbside had, which was a lack of resources, both in labor and in money, and how could I solve those things. And also identifying the very problematic endeavor of just distributing literature in the late aughts, this environment where we're being told that people are no longer reading, and that people, if they are reading, are not reading books. So it was a little bit daunting, to say the least, but I was able to start our internship program, so that solved some of our labor issues, and I created our calendar system and some internal organization things to help us sort of, as a team, work together in a way that worked for us and our resources. We didn't have an office either, so I agreed to have all of the books shipped to my apartment, and I had a very nice roommate at the time that accommodated stacks and stacks and stacks of books, and like the total overhaul of our kitchen table as our central working space. And that was a lot of fun. Chicago's literary community is very DIY. It's very based on small reading series and big reading series, and small zine presses and handmade, hand-bound books. It's a community with a lot of heart, and it's always excited and welcoming to new projects. And I was able to create a community of people that had been working in that industry there for a while, who could teach me what to do. And eventually I was promoted to editor-in-chief and began acquiring books and began deciding what to publish, which was super exciting to me. And in that process, I realized that this was something that I wanted to do, and this wasn't just a career that I wanted to supplement my writing, but was something that I thought I could be good at, and that involved a lot of things that felt very important to me. One thing that I've kept in mind all along, and that I am more mindful of now at my job at FSG, is the way that I came to books and the way that I came to writing, which by a lot of definitions is sort of a non-traditional route. I think when I was young, I thought that books and writing and the publishing industry belonged to a certain sect of people, that they knew what they were doing, and that was maybe something that I couldn't access and wasn't a part of, wasn't allowed to be a part of. But I actually found at Curbside that the people that come to writing are people that really love to write. And the people that come to books are people who really, really love to read. And that's probably been the most helpful lesson of my young career, is that I think it's very important to pursue the things that make you feel smartest and that make you feel the most you. So flash forward a couple of years, I in March moved from Chicago to New York City. And I now work at a big 5 publishing house, which is certainly something that I thought I would never say or do. But I work now as an editor and in digital marketing at FSG, and I work at a new imprint called MCD. Rather than trying to do something different with voice or tone, MCD is an attempt at publishing books in a different way. So we are focused more on digital projects that we're working on with our authors. We focus on social media and digital marketing, I think, more than other publishers do. It's in that way sort of this very indie publishing mentality of utilizing few resources and working creatively with what we have. So yeah, that's sort of my story, but I would love actually to hear from you guys, because I don't like talking about myself, and I do feel that the most exciting part of this is hearing from you guys. So earlier this morning I had a great opportunity to talk to a couple of students, and we talked a lot about writing process and the balance of the creative life and the professional life. So really I would love to hear from you all and any fears you might have about what to do with a writing degree, or getting a degree from a creative program, and what to do in the real world with that. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I have one from my own struggles with being a writer on the one hand and a teacher on the other, or whatever split there is. How do you cope with I find a need for certain mental chaos to be permitted when you're trying to create something, rather than trying to control it or organize it. But then in a professional life, you're trying to be organized and fit within a system and a group, and is that shift back and forth difficult for you? How do you manage it? What's your secret?
That's a very good question. I think about this a lot, and I think the particular challenge that you're sort of getting at there is that I think a lot of the things that inspire me or provoke me to write and that are exciting to me about writing, some of those things are answered by editing. And so when I'm working on other people's work, as an editor, I find that this is particularly true at Curbside, that I was, my creative impulses were in some way being satiated by that work, but I was ignoring the creation of my writing and spending time on that. What I have done, and that which is working for me now, but hasn't always, is applied a lot of organization to the way that I spend my time in a way that I haven't before. So, and I was much better at this about 6 months ago. But I, every morning, give myself an hour to just sort of do whatever I want with the things that I'm reading and the things that I'm writing. I read a lot of stuff for my job, submissions and things that we're publishing, things that we may publish but we're not sure. And that means that I don't have a lot of time to read stuff that I'm actually interested in, right? And then there's also the conversation of books that you feel like you should be reading because everyone else is reading them in the industry. And all of that encroaches on the really important act of reading stuff that just is pleasurable and not forgetting the importance of that. So this hour every morning, my rule is that I have to read and write. The balance of those two things is entirely up to me, and I just sort of determine them that morning. Sometimes it means that I'm reading an article that I bookmarked earlier in the week but couldn't get to. Sometimes it means I'm reading, a portion of a novel that I started weeks and weeks ago and need to finish. And the same goes for the writing as well. I like to keep it at like a 50-50 split. But when I'm writing, it's either journaling, just stuff to keep me mindful and to keep me present. But more often than not, it's trying to write toward an assignment or freelance stuff or a creative project that I've been ignoring. And then I also steal, you have to be very stealthy with your time, I think, as a creative working person. And so I steal moments on the train. I love that I have a commute now. When I was working at home, I didn't. Now I have 45 minutes each way every day to read something. And that's been really wonderful. when the weather was really nice, I was in the habit of leaving my office for lunch and taking walks and just sort of like exploring this new neighborhood in which I worked. But now that the weather's not as nice, I sit at my desk and I write sometimes, or I go back and I read stuff that I really love. So I think, though, in order to be present for those moments, like stealing those moments for yourself, you have to be very mindful about what it is that you want to accomplish with your time as a creative person. And keeping that in mind for me has been really, really helpful. It's a good question.
Also, on nice days, I like to walk beside here when I start to like go out walking trails nearby. And when you walk beside a nice day, do you walk with a friend?
Sometimes I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like my lunch hours are either, like lunch in New York is like, it's like a publishing thing, right? So the publisher's lunch is sort of seen as this like opportunity for socializing. That doesn't really, because I like to use my lunches for myself. I love to actually not do the publishing lunch sort of socializing opportunity and just sort of hide away either at a park or by myself. But that's a good question. I think, to that end as well, there's a possible question there about how protective you have to be over your time, and feeling pressure to use time in a certain way, but knowing that you need it for yourself is definitely a thing to keep in mind too. And I would encourage you to protect your time as much as you can. Hi.
Right. So, I teach here, and I've written short stories, and I have a novel that I really think is excellent, but I'm having trouble, like Curbside. I love Amber Sparks, who is one of your authors, and I feel like, there's a kinship between her writing and our writing. But I find that there's such a gatekeeper to like the bigger presses through the agents now, and you just can't get to them. It used to be that the big presses at least had some over the transom submissions. I'm assuming those are gone now, but this is all leading to a question, which is, do you find with that gatekeeper there that there's a difference in the kind of material that finally makes it to you at SG versus Curbside?
Absolutely. And it's really frustrating. I think, so one of the most exciting things to me about working in independent publishing was that agents aren't going to work with independent publishers because independent publishers, or they don't normally, because usually indie publishers don't have the opportunity or the resources to pay large advances to the writers that they're publishing. And because agents get some of that advance, it's not in their best interest to sell their books to small presses. It's in their best interest to take on writers who they can sell to large presses. However, those are writers that have usually come up through, those writers that agents are seeking to work with, those are usually writers that have come up through a system that has been built to support a certain kind of writer, writers who come to writing in a very traditional way, who have the money and the resources to put themselves through several school programs. I learned that very early on at Curbside, that one of the great things about not having any resources is being able to determine who you work with and seeking those people out. And I took very seriously my role as an editor at a small press as an opportunity to bring different voices to the world. And in that way, I think I'm constantly telling people that I think independent publishers are the future of publishing, because they're forced to make creative, resourceful decisions about who should be heard, who should be read, what voices are the most prescient and the most important. That being said, there are small imprints within the larger imprints of the big five presses that do endeavor to publish and discover small voices. One of them is a faction of FSG, the FSG Originals brand. I would say probably 75% of FSG Originals writers have agents and were submitted to us by agents. And that other 25% are people that the editors who still read literary journals and pay attention to who's popular on social media or whomever. They do pay attention to that, and the rest of that list is sought out and not just asked, or is not just weeded out from what's brought to them by agents. Yeah, it's a thing that I miss a lot about independent publishing, but I'm hoping that in my work at FSG and MCD that I can sort of bring my indie sensibilities to them.
Would you say that your company takes writers with agents more seriously than they do now?
I think, unfortunately, yes. The question was, does FSG take writers with agents more seriously than writers who don't? I think, yeah, there's definitely this implied understanding that agented writers are in some way more serious or in some way more talented. But that's not actually true. Once you familiarize yourself with the rubric that agents are using to discover their writers, you understand that that there are problems within that rubric, and yeah.
What is that rubric? What's it?
Yeah.
Yeah, ooh, this is,
Well, I think the writer needs to be able to make money, and so there's this there's an idea of like what a commercial writer is, and I think that doesn't always mean that the most talented people are being sought after by agents, but just the people with the largest audience or the people with the loudest mouth, and that's shifting a little bit. There are a lot of books from the last couple of years that have been published because people have created a successful community for themselves online, and while sometimes that speaks, I think, to actual talent, or sometimes those people are actually voices that we do need to hear from. A lot of the time, they're not. So, yeah, the agent is trying to make money from the people that they represent, and they're pulling from writing programs, and they're pulling from an established system that has been around for a really long time. I don't know if I have exact points on that rubric, but yeah, it's not always fresh, new, original voices or diverse voices at all. Courtney.
Do you have friends or friends you went to college with that majored in creative writing, or friends who are writers now who, I don't know how to ask this, given up,
Yes.
but don't regret the major?
Yes.
Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this morning in our workshop. That so yes, I guess to answer your first question, I have. I think most of my friends actually aren't. I wouldn't say that they've given up, but they've asked themselves very honestly, which I think is a very admirable thing to do, whether or not they need to write a book, and haven't come away from that question with a resounding yes. These are writers, though, that before I left Chicago would still show up to my writing group. It just no longer became, the pursuit of publishing a book just no longer became the end of, like, the end to the means of their writing, which I think is really interesting. I mean, for them, then, the pressure of producing, producing that book disappeared, and it just became more of a joyful act, just, the pursuit of a creative endeavor that makes you, feel more you, and maybe it doesn't have to end in publication or a certain definition of success. And I respect that a lot. Many of them have gone on to go back to school for other things. Some of them now work in other, I have a friend actually who has a lot of success on Instagram selling albums. And he was in my writing program, and I thought was one of the most talented writers. But I think that what isn't discussed, or what wasn't discussed very often in my writing program, was all of the things and all the skills that you are actually set up to do, and that you leave your degree with. I think that there's a lot to be said about the kinds of problem-solving decisions and critical thinking skills that writing requires of writers. And that people in certain industries are beginning to understand they need. I'm seeing a big rise in digital media, people needing young people on their staffs to come and not only just like manage social media because they're good at it and they use it every day, but to do it really well, to communicate creatively, to experiment via that platform. In tech, there's also this movement to prize content as much as development and coding and things like that. And I think that that's really exciting. When you leave a writing program, you leave with the very special skill of being able to efficiently and creatively and engagingly communicate something to an audience that you're also taught to know very well. And I think that's really, really cool. And it isn't a skill that's taught to all industries anymore. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
Another, not to hop the questions, but. So if you were a young writer starting out now and you now know, okay, so maybe social media presence is a piece of my future agent's rubric. Where do you suggest people focus their attention? Because there are many options of how, where, and when you could engage social media, and how. What do you think is important to show through that?
It's a good question. I think that writers should. It's hard because I don't feel like someone who, even though it's like part of my job, I'm not particularly. I don't think I'm good at social media. I don't think that it's, or at least like representing myself personally. I think I'm very good at representing the brand that I work for, and I know how to do that. But I think thinking of yourself as a writer, as a brand is very smart. Using social media to interact with other people in the industry, following them and their accounts, tweeting at them, being respectful, of course, of, I wouldn't like slide into anyone's DMs all the time, but I think that like thinking about yourself as a brand and what you want to communicate about yourself to the world is, from like a professional perspective, is really important to consider. I think, when you leave your program, you should have a website that illustrates what you've been working on in your program, and your social media should be present on that website or should be found via that website. And it should be like, I don't know, I think I'm most interested in writers whose social media presences don't just feel professional, but feel like a pretty accurate representation of themselves, where it's like playful and it's funny and it's maybe a little bit self-deprecating, definitely self-aware. I think that, just thinking about those things, the avenues that we have, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and whatever, thinking about them as reflections of yourself and the kind of person you want to be regarded as is important. And I think it's difficult too, because for a lot of people that requires a shift. Most of us in this room have grown up with social media, and it was not a thing that we were thinking of at all as a professional communication tool. So making that shift, I think, can feel really foreign, or it can feel just absolutely not like a good idea or interesting, but it is something to keep in mind. I think you had a question.
I did. First off, just to return to your poem, do you know anyone else personally who escaped the boxes of Indiana or any other Rust Belt state?
Yes, I do.
It's not an easy thing to do. I know many people who haven't. You mentioned curbsides. You were editor-in-chief, so I assume there were many genres that you got to experience. However, now that you're working for one of the big five, they tend to allocate they're much more finite. So is there a certain genre that you work in now, or what is your title? What is your brand?
Sure. I'm a senior digital media editor. So that, honestly, when I applied for the job, I was like, what does that mean? And it had a different title at the time. It was senior digital marketing coordinator. And I was like, I don't know what that means. So someone tell me. And then we changed it when I came aboard, because it was initially a straight digital media position, but because I came on with so much editorial experience, we wanted to incorporate that as well. So are you asking what forms are more, like what genres and forms are more appealing to the big five to publish?
No,
or?
because you can go to a bookstore and you can see there's every time there's new releases, they're in all genres, or any genre, poems to fiction to whatever it may be.
Sure.
So is there something that you focus on yourself? I don't know if I'd call that your favorite, or if you're defined to it because of your job.
Sure. So the
Name
thing
the big five. Can you name the big five?
Yeah, it is Penguin Random House, which of course used to be two different presses. Hachette and, God, what are the big, Macmillan, the company I work for. And there are two others I always forget.
Simon & Schuster.
Yeah, Simon & Schuster. What is the fifth one?
Little Brown, too small. Harper Collins.
I think it's HarperCollins, yeah.
You're right.
So yeah, those are publicly, well, the four of those, everyone except Macmillan in that family is publicly owned. Macmillan, the company I work for, it technically is an independently owned company. And so sometimes they try to get away with describing themselves as an independent entity, and I'm like, you're not. But the endeavor of MCD, this new imprint that I work at within FSG, which is within Macmillan, which explains the hierarchy of publishing pretty perfectly, is not so much like a shift in tone or voice or even form, but approaching books in a different way via digital marketing and digital projects. So I will say though, we like the entire industry, we really trend toward publishing novels. My boss, Sean McDonald, who's a fantastic editor, has built a career on publishing books that I think people kind of lump under the word strange, but it means that he really likes dystopian fiction. He likes people who come to writing from an entirely different industry. So we publish John Darnielle, who's the lead of the Mountain Goats. A couple of our writers are people who have had very successful careers in tech, or we have a couple of writers who are musicians or artists in some other capacity, and writing is sort of second nature to them, but it's something that they're obviously also very skilled at. So that's sort of ingrained in MCD, is that, and I like that very much, that the editors that I'm working with are often not looking for writers that just came right through to writing, but sort of arrived at it in a roundabout way. Yeah.
So, if you don't mind my continuing my question, and to follow up with Professor White, perhaps someone who has writing aspirations should start a dystopian blog?
Yeah, actually that's a really good point. One of the ways in which I think you can start to strike up a relationship or some sort of communication with a publisher is to review their books. Get in touch with them over email, contact their publicist and find out if you can get a review copy of a book that you know is forthcoming that you are sincerely interested in. Write the review, publish it to your own site, sell it to somewhere else, and then communicate, follow up with them. Let them know that you've reviewed their book somewhere. And I mean, that's the kind of sort of like literary citizenship that publishers of all sizes really appreciate. I sought out a lot of those relationships when I was working in independent publishing. They could feel crucial to the success of a book. I don't have to do that so much anymore, but I will say even at FSG, where we have an entire publicity department, the publicists love small blogs and Goodreads reviews and Amazon reviews just as much, or nearly just as much as a review in a major respected publication. Anything else?
Can you talk about internships, the pros and cons? Because I know a lot of people, when they're going into any field now, are told, oh, you should do an internship.
Right. I have very mixed feelings about internships. I feel like they have swallowed the entry-level job market. A lot of the industry as a whole, I think all of the big five now are required by law to, or have, I think they are required by law in New York, but have adopted paid internship programs. And a lot of those programs are also limited to students who are currently enrolled at some sort of university, which is a great measure to maintain, but it also means that not everyone who wants to work in publishing is currently in school or is enrolled in a writing program. So internships, I think, are by design a little bit problematic, but they are a very serious way in which you can, actually gain access to employment opportunities in an industry that otherwise does a very terrible job of bringing in new and fresh voices. A couple of our interns from the last summer program at FSG were in fact hired, and I think that's really great. I think that there's often this understanding that you take on the internship and then you do the internship and you leave, and that's like the whole of your experience there. I will also say that FSG does a very good job of making it an educational experience and not just an experience in copying things and getting coffee for people. In fact, our interns are not allowed to get coffee for anyone, which, yeah, I think is great. And this past fall, we also enacted this effort to have lunch with our interns once a week as a group. They meet with different people in the different departments at FSG. There's now this like departure program and party that we throw for them. I think it's a very good program. I think that if you are able to work for very little or work for free, if you have that privilege, it's a really great idea to pursue internships. They are still regarded as, the beginning into publishing.
So for those of us not willing to relocate to New York City, because perhaps our wives won't allow it,
Sure.
you just suggest writing on the internet.
I think it's a really excellent way to just make yourself present and known and seen, even if virtually, within the community. I think another great thing that you can do is take advantage of festivals that you can get to. The Brooklyn Book Festival happens every year, and it's a really wonderful opportunity to meet a lot of publishers face to face. I used to travel to New York every year for that festival on behalf of Featherproof and Curbside, and would work the table. And I know that absolutely a lot of the people that are working the table selling those books are the editors and the senior editors and the founders of those presses. And you can just walk right up to them and talk to them about their books. It's probably not a great opportunity to ask straight out about employment or publishing, or publication, but it's a great way to start off a conversation with someone. I will say that the publishing industry really does, this phrase I used earlier, literary citizenship, is something that people really, really prize within the industry. This idea that, like, I'll help you if you help me, in exchange of resources or ideas or favors. Most of the people that I've approached have, when I've needed help or been seeking some sort of mentorship, I've been really willing to do so. So if you just approach someone honestly and let them know where you are and what you think that they can teach you, you'll probably be met with, someone who's pretty open to doing that.
What are some of the independent presses that you like sort of following these days?
Totally.
Who's hot?
It's a very good question. I think, honestly, most of them aren't in New York, so you don't have to just be in New York. I really love Coffee House Press. They're based in Minneapolis. Grey Wolf is there as well as Milkweed. Those three presses kind of own that part of the country, and I think they're doing really, really great work. The people that work there at each of those presses they're all very singular and very talented, and really have a finger on the pulse of what people in America are reading. I think that Counterpoint, which is based in Los Angeles, although they are connected to presses that are based in New York, they do really great stuff. Wave, which is a poetry press, it's based in Seattle. I think they're doing really incredible work. And in Chicago, there are presses like Curbside Splendor and Featherproof. There's a small press called Agate that does quite a few commercially, like in scope, commercial books, and some cookbooks as well. Chicago Review Press is there. It's and to find these presses, you can go online. Poetsandwriters.org is a really great resource. Electricliterature.com is a really great resource. LitHub.com is great. All of these sites are about building literary community, and so while you may not find like a list of presses you're going to be reading about them and the work that they're publishing and the writers that they're publishing. And I think also the greatest way to educate yourself on who's publishing and what's being published is just pay attention to the books that you're reading. Open up to that second or third page and the copyright information is there, and you can find the name and location of the press and look them up online and go from there.
I think electronic publishing is something that's going to be a way to grow.
Absolutely. She asked if I think electronic publishing, I guess you mean online magazines and things like that, yeah. In fact, we're publishing a book next fall called Impossible Owls, and that young man, it's a collection of essays about, it's by this young writer, and I think all but one of the essays in that collection exist online and online only. Literary journals are still really great. I think in some respects I love literary journals. I read them all the time, and I think that they're still and will always be a really excellent resource for discovering new writers. But there are some really, really wonderful online journals that are doing exciting things and are experimenting with the digital forms in ways that I think are really exciting. And they do a really wonderful job some of them do a really wonderful job of publishing their writers, supporting them beyond just the publication of that journal or that project. In particular, I really like Tin House. I think they do a really great job. There is a politically minded journal called The Point in Chicago that I think is really great. And if you pay attention to the social media accounts of these of journals, they're often shouting out writers they published several issues ago, and I think that's really cool. So I think at one time, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, even or more recent, there was this and I'm sure it still exists to some people. They're a little bit foolish, but this idea that an online publication doesn't mean as much. But depending on the journal and how seriously they take themselves, I think it can be even more powerful. You're probably reaching more people when you publish online. Almost undoubtedly, you're reaching more people when you publish online than in print. Who else has questions?
Anyone?
Yeah, I remember on Elf, his dad worked for a publishing company.
Oh, an Elf.
Yes.
With Will Ferrell?
Yeah, I think it was a publishing company.
I haven't seen that in a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll mingle around for a little while. Because of all this great online publishing that Naomi does, we don't have books for sale. Are you still working on a novel that you're thinking about putting into paper form for our future reference?
I am working on a novel. I'm also working on a novella right now, which is a little bit more exciting to me. It's less daunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see. I don't know.
All right. So if you have secret questions that you just don't want to shout out in front of the group, come on up and ask one-on-one. Hang out, and please help